Thank you all for taking the time to say hello to one another, even if you've known each other for a while now. And what I'd like to do now is turn this session over to our wonderful panelists. They're going to be sharing some of the work that they've done around coherence in these earliest grades. First off, we'll have Stephanie Kloos sharing. She's the Executive Director for Elementary Education at San Rafael City Schools, talking about some of the instructional coherence efforts that they're taking on in their district. Next, we'll have Cresta McIntosh talking about the Associate Superintendent of Educational Services in Monterey Peninsula Unified School District, talking about their journey that they've taken with UPK and UTK. And then finally, we'll finish with Dr. Alix Gallagher, the Director of Strategic Partnerships at PACE, talking about some of the research that we've done looking at the great work across the state. So, Stephanie, go ahead and start us off.
Okay, I'm going to spend a little time, I'm guessing a lot of you in here are teachers who have been in the classroom, and so I'm going to get a little nerdy with that today and really focus on instructional practices and the work that we did in San Rafael. Sorry. And the work, is that better? A little bit better? Yes, okay. And the work that we've been doing in San Rafael to really be intentional and thoughtful while really having a lot of fun. This work brings us a lot of joy in thinking about how do we best serve our TK students and how do we expand that work in ways that work for our students. So San Rafael City Schools, we are, if you know the Bay Area, we're just north of the Golden Gate Bridge. When you think of Marin County, you probably don't think of demographics similar to San Rafael, but this is who we serve at San Rafael. We actually are two school districts. We're a TK-8 district and a 9-12 district who have a shared board cabinet, and all of our students in our TK-8 roll up into our high school district. We have 7 elementary schools, 1 middle school, 2 high schools, and 1 alternative high school. In total, we serve about 7,000 kids, and for us, we're really, about 64% of our students are ever ELs. In our elementary district, that's about 70% of them are multilingual learners. We're about 11.5% students with disabilities. And at this point right now, we have 9 TKs, including a dual language immersion. And one of the things, and I'll talk a little bit about this, but we made a really big push to have TK at every site, in part because of that coherence, but also that idea of how do we build community into this process. So that's a little bit who we are, but really for us, this centers the work and a lot of the decisions we made so that we could serve the students in front of us. So if I had to name our number one goal when we thought about expanding TK, came right off of the heels of, and our kids are back in school. And so the number one thing we really thought about was creating, as much as possible, a coherent experience for our students and families, right? So when we think about the kids in front of us, do they need to know that TK is new? Or is it just part of coming to school because that's what I do and it's really fun, right? And how do our families become part of the system that they're going to be part of for the next 6, 7, 8, 12 years, right, depending on their school? And so we had this graduate profile that you see up here, and that was really our North Star as to when they are done in our system, this is what we have said through our strategic plan, which had a lot of community engagement, that we're going to be working towards. Problem solvers, reflective learners, community advocates, communicators, collaborators, and critical thinkers. I was also at a really unique position as a parent where I had 2 preschool-age students myself who were about to enter our system. And so I got the joy and also the kind of the leg up to see what preschool looked like day in, day out, and thinking about, my kids were at a city preschool, thinking about how do we provide this awesome support to all of our learners as part of our district, as opposed to something that just some students in our district get because their parents are able to afford it, or they got on the wait list earlier, or whatever it might be. And one of my kids also has substantial disabilities, and so thinking again about how does his preschool experience prepare him, he's now in TK, and knock on wood, doing very well. But how does it prepare him for our system, right? And we now get to do that work as a TK. And so what we really were talking about, we have values in our district that we've spent a lot of time developing and talking about and thinking about. And as I was getting ready for this, I was thinking about how much these really played into our TK work. We've spent a lot of time talking about how TK needs to be a play-based experience that absolutely prepares them for the academics that come, but it needs to be play-based, right? That's what the research tells us. They have to be part of our community. It was a really big deal in our district to focus on making sure that when we expanded TK, there was a TK at every elementary school site. And that is a decision that I think we have come to recognize how important that decision was. But most importantly, TK is a lever for equity for us. If we serve primarily multilingual learners, primarily students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, most of whom did not have the opportunity to access a formalized educational experience at the age of 4, this was an opportunity for us to push into that. And so those were things that we took really seriously. One of the things I know my former superintendent got tired of me saying, but was really important, was this isn't kindergarten light. This isn't just redoing kindergarten, but we're really being intentional about it and creating that idea of coherence in the system. We were really fortunate because we had something to build on. And so I want to stress how much this for us really was a game changer. We had a long-standing grant with an organization called the Marin Community Foundation that focused on PK through 3 coherence already. So we already had some systems in place at a handful of our schools where we had intentional partnerships between the practitioners at the local preschools, which were CBOs, to our classrooms, direct collaboration between our preschool teachers essentially and our kindergarten teachers. So we did handoffs already. We shared professional development. In particular, we focus, because we have so many multilingual learners, we call them SEAL content units. But so the SEAL strategies for integrated ELD specifically. We had already done some of that alignment work, and so we had some things to kind of work off of and build upon. We also had been sharing with them and focusing on data systems amongst those schools. Again, how do we pass on what we know about our students and what's impactful from preschool to kindergarten? And then also really thinking about aligned social emotional work, which is obviously a cornerstone of TK. So we had some really great things to build off of, which really helped us in this work. That first year from 2021 to 2022 was a lot of how do we learn from our preschool partners. And again, this is a space where I think we were really fortunate because we had partnerships already, but also because my kids were in preschool, I could go into preschool and see what they were doing. I had the opportunity to talk to their preschool teachers on a regular basis. It wasn't always smooth. If you recall, or if you were doing this work at this time, there was a lot of emotion around the UTK initiative from people who were in preschools, right? Because essentially we were taking their student population. And so there was a lot of conversation, a lot of continuing repair work, and frankly, a lot of learning that we asked to do from them because they were already doing a really phenomenal job with our students. They were doing the preschool learning for foundations already. We didn't know how to do that. And so there was a lot of humility in that, but there was a lot of learning, and they've continued to be really fabulous partners. And we continue to visit them. We continue to look at their environment, and we continue to reach out to them for those supports. So that was an opportunity for us to really build on the work that was already happening in our county, but most specifically our city, and think about how we do our next step as a district. And then another piece we've spent a lot of time and we continue to do now is being really intentional about, if we think about coherence, both vertically and, oh my gosh, this is really embarrassing. I'm blanking on that word right now. Thank you. Horizontally, we also had to make sure that we were having good experiences across our TKs. And we've put a lot of time and energy into that professional development system. So everything, like I said, from TK at all schools to really honoring this idea of being a TK teacher. So we had teachers apply to it. We provided summer institutes. We continue to have classroom coaching. We spend a lot of time working on setup. We have monthly professional development. Our TK teachers have actually asked for more time, which we don't hear often, but that's been a really fabulous PLT that has been really authentically built. And then we've spent a lot of time thinking, excuse me, about this second adult-teacher partnership. It's so rare that we have two really amazing adults in a classroom with our students. And so how can we make sure we set that up for success? That has been a really big focus of our continued work as we try to build that horizontal coherence. And then the last thing we've spent a lot of time really thinking about is how do we build this up? So if TK is where students are entering with us, how do we make sure that we're giving as much vertical alignment as we can to our students and our families? And that has been everything. Today I'm actually missing a math learning lab at one of our sites. We're working with excuse me, California Ed Partners, and one of the things we've talked a lot about is what are the practices and how do those grow for our mathematicians from the youngest age all the way up to right now we're focusing through third grade, but how do those practices grow and getting really intentional? And so today we had TK first and second grade teachers all together. It was actually in my son's class, and last night he goes, "Mommy, I'm so excited but so nervous. There's all these grown-ups coming in to watch how we do choral counting." And I was, of course, getting really excited about that. But that I think there's a lot of power in teachers sharing those practices vertically and thinking about how can this look and grow. Because we know not all second graders come in performing academically as a second grader. So what can I learn from my TKK first grade partners that I can then apply and then build upon for those students? We've gotten really intentional about social emotional learning. So again, thinking about how does an adoption that we do, for example, Second Step, which is only a K-8 curriculum, does that align to TK? And if it doesn't, that's not what we're gonna do. It does, but this is how, and so getting really thoughtful about that. Talked a little bit about our SEAL content units, and we have a whole scope and sequence that maps those content units and language for our students. And so we can see how it looks throughout the year and then how it also grows with time with students. So those have been some of the things we've really thought about in terms of building that coherence instructionally for our students. When we think about next steps, some of these next steps are learnings and things, now that we know them, we're just gonna do a little bit differently, right? And some of them, one of them I'm really excited about, and I think is for us, the culmination, or not the culmination, hopefully actually the beginning of some exciting new work. We are just starting in San Rafael City Schools Early Learning Center, where we have housed, for a variety of reasons, some of which are related to our challenges, where we have a longstanding partnership with a CBO, and so they're gonna bring their blended funding state and Head Start preschools. They're gonna take up half the school. We are gonna have 3 or 4 TKs on there where we don't yet have space, so we're building buildings for the rest of our TKs on that campus, and then we're really purposely moving our early intervention SDC classes onto that so that we can do a better job of providing inclusive practices for our students in special education. That's a big area of need we have. We will continue our professional development, but with some tweaks as we do some learning about how to better serve our students. And then this continued focus on instructional alignment. So every year continuing to refine more and more. If I want my kids to cognitively focus on the content, I need to keep routines, systems, and structures as similar as possible so that they're not putting all their cognitive energy on how did it change from TK to kindergarten, but that their cognitive energy can really be around the content. Some of the challenges that we're facing right now and that are things that we're gonna continue to work through is knowing enrollment. TK enrollment is really challenging, and I think it's across the state, we're not seeing enrollment numbers that we thought, and then all of a sudden I looked at our enrollment for next year and we're only 50 off from what we projected, and it's mid-January. So what does that mean, and are we prepared? I don't know, but that's definitely a challenge we have. The TK teacher workforce is probably our biggest challenge. Everything from the credential requirements to second adults, to just hiring enough multi-subject teachers, period. This is gonna continue to be a challenge. It's a real opportunity, but it's definitely a challenge we're facing. Our budget, I'm sure for many of you who work in districts, you're going through this right now too, but we are projecting a $3 to $4 million, need to cut $3 to $4 million at this point, and how that's gonna impact some of the systems and structures we've put in place to support students is notable and really hard. Data systems. Right now, how do we collect data in an aligned way? We're just talking about our SIS system doesn't yet connect to DRDP. And so how do we even kind of pull that data with a student is something we're continuing to work through. And the last one is space. We have some big bond work underway next year. We redirected money towards TKs, but we don't yet have the space for all of our TKs, and the classrooms aren't quite what they need to be. And so those are all some opportunities for us, but also some things we're working through right now.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Coming up next, we'll have Cresta sharing some of the work that she has done in Monterey Peninsula Unified School District, building Coherent, as well as some of the data system pieces they've put in place.
All right, good afternoon. That's a hard act to follow. Oh my gosh, I was like taking notes, like, wow, that's amazing. I'm learning so much. Anyway, well, welcome this afternoon. I'm really excited to share some of the journey that we've been on around not only our early education supports for our students in Monterey Peninsula Unified, but also our journey around coherence. And I would like to add that I think sustainability around this work is not a destination, but rather it's a dynamic process that we're continuously evaluating as we move forward. So our original why, so it actually happened about 9 years ago. I entered into MPUSD, and there had been some work done with First Five, identifying and surveying students and community members around their experience with early childhood education within the community. What it found was that 27% of our students on the peninsula were considered kinder ready, only 27%. And in addition to that, we also found that many of our families were not accessing early education. At the time, I think we only had about two classes in Monterey at the time that was offering transitional kindergarten. And we had some various preschool classes, but they were not expanded at all. Most of them were half day. So that shut off the screen. Okay. So what that launched within our community, the following year, our board of trustees adopted a policy to expand transitional kindergarten. So we actually expanded the date to March 1st, and this was even before UPK came across our plates. And we felt that it was an equity strategy. So we utilized that funding through our LCFF dollars to support the expanded transitional kindergarten. Part of that reason, obviously, we identified it as an equity strategy because we knew it was going to be absolutely important. We knew the research behind it, but we also knew it was very important to ensure that our emerging bilingual students, our students with disabilities, our economically disadvantaged students had access, that it wasn't difficult, that they had access to high quality early learning experiences. We also ensured that we had a transitional kindergarten at every single one of our campuses. In fact, we had more than that at a couple of them, depending on the support. We expanded our preschool program. So now we have 3 preschool centers in our community, one in Monterey, one in Seaside, and one in Marina. We expanded the number of classes that we had from not only half day, but full day. We applied for more expansion funds. Now I'm really excited to say that we're also serving, we're cradle to career. We're serving our infants all the way to high school, so that's really exciting. But at the time, that actually allowed more than 300 students in the ages of 4 or 5 to be enrolled in a high quality early learning experience in Monterey. We zeroed in knowing that there were going to be some students who would not be able to qualify for TK, that they would be able to enroll in our preschool classes, so we found it very important to ensure that there was coherence between our preschool and TK. That's where we began the process of ensuring that we had a common curriculum, that we were supporting those vertical PLCs, that we were using the same type of assessment. So we were actually using the DRDP, which is the Desired Results Developmental Profile, which gave us quite a bit of data that we worked on creating a pipeline and support. So we were very excited about the impact of this work, and obviously a significant investment came from our LCAP to support this work, and community investment as well. So what we found out, though, our board asked us, look, we're investing, we're supporting this, we know that it's going to have an impact, is it? And so we engaged using our goal that we had in place, that this was going to this effort was going to give our students access to a trajectory that would allow them to be successful in their future. What we found, and this is just a snapshot of some of the data that we looked at. So we have we use the DRDP, but we also use something called iReady, which is a diagnostic assessment that's given 3 times a year that looks at standards, California standards, both in reading and math. What you'll see here is the reading scores. So what we did is we tracked students that had been in our TK and preschool programs and looked at their trajectory, their success, their performance over time, as compared to students who had not received TK or preschool within our system. So what you'll see here is as the students came in to kindergarten, you'll see that they were outperforming students that did not receive TK significantly. But now as you follow the students over time, that performance became less and less over time. So although we were putting our students on a pathway of success and acceleration by providing them with a high quality learning experience in early learning, the longer they were in our system, the less they remained on that accelerated journey. So you'll see the same for our students that are economically disadvantaged. This is significant, and now we only have about 4 percentage points here in terms of proficiency. And then here for our multilingual learners here in the system. So that actually launched we began the journey of preschool through 3rd grade coherence. We actually partnered with Ed Partners, which we were very appreciative of. They really supported us in many ways. But this work also became us focusing on how can we ensure that, especially for our multilingual learners, our students with disabilities, our students that are economically disadvantaged, that we support them in continuing to remain accelerated, because we must bridge that gap. So this is the preschool through 3rd grade coherence map that essentially we utilized through the work, our partnership with California education partners, both in literacy and in math. And although this looks fairly linear, right? Like in the classroom we do these things, in the system we do these things, but what I would say is that it's actually a cyclical cycle. I think about it similar to like wheels in a cog, right? You touch one, the other pieces are going to move. So as our work, our improvement teams and our work centered on a few pieces, like, wow, we really have to make sure that our curriculum is aligned so that we can support students as they transition to one grade to the other. Well, that also meant that we had to rethink the assessments that we were using. That also meant that we had to rethink the professional development that we were utilizing to support more developmentally appropriate practices. So each move that we made, we also had to consider both system and classroom implications to ensure that our approach was sustainable and it was transformative for those students. A little bit of a sample of what our work looked like over the course of 3 years, and I would say that we're still deeply engaged. We're engaged in literacy, and this is just a sample of math that outlines some of the areas that we approached and how we approached the work for coherence. And following this, I'll share some promising data that's surfacing for us that we're really excited about. So we began with the classroom. We know that research is telling us that vertical alignment and vertical conversations are incredibly important, not just for coherence for preschool through 3rd grade, but we also know that it's incredibly important even from 8th to 9th or other transition experiences for students. So we began a vertical PLC that actually brought every single preschool through 3rd grade teacher together, and at the time, it was during the pandemic, and so who would have thought this was actually possible? Before the pandemic, by the way, thank you, Zoom, right? We figured out a way to bring all folks together to have really important conversations about what students were capable of doing. We highlighted the amazing work that were happening in our preschool classrooms and what students were able to do. So an example of this was that we had a preschool teacher brought some evidence of student work of a student in a counting collection actually showing their work of how they were counting up to 120. to a conversation to a kindergarten teacher that said, well, I'm only giving them 10 things to count on because that's what the standard is right now. The reality is being able to see what students were able to do changed their perspective about how they were providing opportunities for their students just through these vertical conversations. We started talking about teaching and learning through a high quality, high leverage pedagogical practices. We brought in a book study called Counting Collections and Choral Counting, which really supported and kind of provided, I would say, a low floor and high ceiling opportunity for teachers to really engage in creating developmentally appropriate opportunities for students, but also to be able to collect anecdotal data along the way. I'm sure many of you know this, but the older the students get, the less anecdotal data that is collected about them in the classroom happens. And so we know that that's a fundamental piece that we need to continue to support. Our system shifted. Obviously, we continued to emphasize the power of vertical PLCs, and we created community of practice across the board in that. And then we began to, we did adopt a new math curriculum, TK through 8. Actually, that should say kinder through 8. We had creative curriculum for preschool and TK. But we did, in order to support coherence, we felt that that was I would say, a structural piece that needed to take place to support instructional coherence. We deepened our work. We continued our math PLCs. We engaged in really centering our instructional framework around these 6 high-leverage pedagogical practices that supported across the board. We enhanced our professional development opportunities, both for teachers and for leaders. We engaged in learning walks. We looked at practices across the board. We actually went into preschools. We went into kinders. We're actually, TKs, we're going into kinders this year to really look at how are we seeing practices. Lacey Robinson says that justice is found in the details of teaching and learning, right? So when we're looking at how the impact of the practices that we're doing, if we're not seeing the students and what they're being able to do in the conditions of the classroom, then all the other data, like, it matters, but it doesn't matter as much unless we're actually seeing how our students' experiences are changing. And then we established a vision of mathematics that actually was extending across all the way to 8th grade. So this vision of mathematics that we created is not only to support the coherence in preschool through 3rd grade, but it's there to support all of our coherence even into 8th grade. And this is a sample of the work that continued to happen. So each step that we took each year was in an effort to scale and sustain the work over time. And as I said before, sustainability is about a really dynamic process and looking at data and engaging in those practices. I would say that the big piece that we're focusing on right now and continues to be what we're deepening is leadership capacity. As you know, as the age frame continues to expand for TK on our elementary sites, that in just a couple of years, we're going to start the year out with 3-year-olds. And so that work is really important to help our school leaders build the conditions that are necessary to support those students as they come on our campus. And so this is here, I think someone's going to speak to this, but what I would add is we have some really promising data that's surfacing, and so the data that you're looking at was for pre-pandemic. We are currently in the process of creating a dashboard that's looking at post-pandemic data that is not only looking at the increase of different opportunities for different students within our community to engage in our early learning opportunities, but how our multilingual learners growing over time. So we've actually centered a lot of our work around our multilingual learners, and the hopeful data that we're seeing from looking at last year to this year, that our students, our multilingual learner students, are making more growth towards their stretch growth every year. So for example, I think the year before, they were about 10% of our students at this point in time were meeting their stretch growth target for our multilingual learners. This point in the year, we have about 15%. So we're seeing an increase of students who are meeting their growth. And the point of the stretch growth is the more students are accelerated in meeting their growth targets, the more likely they will be to be on a trajectory that's accelerated, which is why the coherence work is really important for us. I'll just leave it there.
Thank you so much, Cresta. And last but not least, we have Alix Gallagher coming to share some of the policy perspectives and data needs for continuing this type of coherence work.
Well, thank you. I am here to kind of step back a bit. You've heard some work about 2 districts talking about the work they're doing right now to really strengthen P3 coherence. And what I want to talk about a bit more is the way data, having really good data for a couple of different purposes, is central to enabling lots of districts across the state to do this type of work. So, slide slightly out of order, we can fix that. Okay, so I wanted to start by talking about the state data. At the state level, what is the data that exists that would help districts do this type of work of improving their programs and making sure that those programs and those changes are really mattering for kids? And when we look down with our younger learners, for students who are in California's state preschool program, the DRDP is required. Teachers give it all the time, and it's absolutely mandated by the state, and there are data there. If kids are in TK, right now the state is in the process of revising the DRDP, and it's unclear whether the state is going to recommend that districts use it, if they're going to mandate it. It will be there, but it's not really clear whether the state is going to say to folks, hey, you really ought to use this. And then when we go from kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and all the way until kids take the SBAC at the end of third grade, at a state level, we know nothing about kids. And the reason I put this diagram together with that kind of data-free zone, elevated a bit up, is I wanted to call people's attention to the proportions. We're talking about roughly 1/3 of students' time in our public education system where there is not necessarily any data available to, at a macro level, monitor students' progress. And I think that's a problem. So let me talk a bit, kind of dig in a bit more to that. So what's wrong with that picture? As I said, we're missing a lot of data. And we understand, I think, 2 really important things that should make us want that data. The first is that early childhood education can be transformative for students' lives. Absolutely transformative. But then there's kind of a semicolon, because we also have research that shows that depending on the quality of that education, early childhood learning is not always transformative. And there was a pretty famous study that came out a couple of years in Tennessee that actually found some negative effects of preschool. But it has a ton of potential, and as a result, our state is investing very heavily in making sure that there's universal access to preschool and especially TK. The other thing we know is that if students at the end of third grade are in a really good position academically, they are much more likely to succeed in the long run. We know actually in California, our schools from third grade on, students progress at a level that, at a rate where if they ended third grade on grade level, if they progressed at that same rate in general, they would finish their senior year of high school on grade level. But most students in our state do not. At the end of third grade, they are not on grade level, and so that rate of growth is insufficient for meeting our state goals. And putting those things together, what I take from those is we really need to make sure not only all students have access to early childhood education, but it has to be really high quality early childhood education. And how do we know that it's high quality? Because it's working for kids. One of the other things that's kind of, I think, a very important political point that I've now heard several anecdotes about is trying to get a superintendent whose board is saying, hey, you really need to improve student outcomes to focus on the earliest learners is really hard, because there's not going to be any data necessarily available to show how those early learners are doing for several years. And especially when you think about superintendent turnover, that's just not fast enough. So what do we have to do? We have to do something to get better as a state, to better position educators in our districts, both politically and also from a knowledge basis to figure out how we're doing for early childhood. and as an aside, most of you know this investment in TK is a hefty investment. We heard before, as of now in the governor's budget, the level of investment is staying steady. But if we don't do a good job, even though this program has a ton of potential, it is vulnerable, which I think, again, is just one more reason that we have to get really clear on understanding that we are delivering quality opportunities that really meet kids' needs. I also want to talk a bit specifically about the fade out that Cresta called out so clearly on slides. This is not unique to Monterey Peninsula whatsoever. It's been very well documented. And one of the mechanisms for that that research has suggested is that kindergarten teachers, maybe even subconsciously, they are compensatory with their efforts. If they see kids who are behind, kindergarten teachers work really, really, really hard to catch those kids up. That's probably one of the mechanisms in play. But I think definitely Cresta, maybe also Stephanie, talked about this idea of ceiling and the fact that the way education K-12 often works is it's driven by standards, which is great. But if you have given some students through a program like TK already access to learning such that they are already meeting those standards, their teachers may not actually be providing them any opportunity to learn beyond where they already are. So there's a way in which kind of this prevalence of TK both gives us the opportunity to push beyond some of the achievement patterns we've had so far, and without data, people won't have a way of understanding what's happening in their systems to figure out if they're actually maximizing this new opportunity. So what do we need to measure? And in this area, I think there are actually two different levels of response that are needed. At the state level, we need to understand who is enrolling in various early childhood programs in a centralized place. We also need to understand some of the central features of those programs. And I think it's fair to say that this should be collected for whether it's California State Preschool program, anything publicly funded. We need to know some basic features, including if it's full day or half day, because that's, there is research that shows the importance of full day pre-K, TK programs for student outcomes. Right now, there is flexibility in what districts need to offer. And if we're going to take a look at the student outcomes for programs, it becomes incredibly important that we be able to pull out across the state, are we getting better outcomes in full day programs, as would we expect? Additionally, centering the needs of multilingual learners who make up the majority in a whole lot of districts, but also across the state. Of these students, we need to understand what supports are we providing for our multilingual learners, and again, be able to parse out those different supports so we can learn how best to serve them. The last thing that we really need, and this comes partially from an evaluation perspective, formally or informally, but we need to know where kids are when they enter kindergarten. Some type of initial assessment of students, their literacy skills, their mathematics skills, but additionally, their social emotional learning. How are they doing on the range of skills we need for success? We need to know where they come in at entry. And this is really important both for understanding what benefits students are accruing from their educational experiences prior to kindergarten, but also to set a baseline to be able to understand what happens from kindergarten beyond. At a district level, districts need to do actually a lot of the things that Monterey Peninsula is doing already, but it needs to become more widespread because very few districts, from what we've seen across the state, have the ability to make the statements that Cresta can make. They need to collect and monitor data on student learning from kindergarten through third grade. Really importantly, they need to analyze those data by subgroups and early childhood programs. And I said that before I saw Cresta's slide doing it. It's really helpful to understand if you know you've put this program in place for a specific need that your community has, you want to be able to track how you're doing for different kids. And you also need to be able to understand which types of students are being more or less well served by your program. Are there some kids whose learning is continuing to accelerate and others who is not in the system? The diagnosis that can happen from data, that doesn't fix problems, but you don't really have a chance of fixing them if you don't have any visibility into the system. And that's where we sit right now. So if you want to read more, there's a commentary that PACE and PPIC, so myself and two PPIC researchers just released, showing some research they did on the former, not universal TK, but the TK that is missing several of the features of the current program, was not universal. We just released, subsequent to that, talking about the data issues and the things we'd need to better understand the effectiveness of TK. So please feel free to click the link and check it out.
All right, thank you to all the panelists. So this is my favorite part, where you all get to digest some of this material together with the folks at your table. I'll give you guys 15 to 20 minutes to do that. And one of my asks for you all is, you'll see there's index cards on your table. If there are any questions that emerge during your conversation that you would like the panelists to take on during the Q&A session at the end, please go ahead and write those questions on there, and I'll collect them shortly before we come back together as a group. So I'll give you guys some time to chat. And the main questions that we want to raise up around this issue in particular are, what questions or observations came up for you? Are there ideas or action items you can take back to your own organization? And then finally, what are some statewide policy structures or supports that you feel are needed at this time in this space? So I'll leave you to it. To begin with, I think the most common question that I received from the tables was regarding kind of this idea of a data-free zone PK through third grade and what can be done to address it. So panelists, from your perspective, what outcomes do you propose that the state collect, and what mechanism that remains true to developmentally appropriate practice and doesn't overimpose? So that's for all of you.
I'll take a start at this, and then I'll turn it over to the people who have to live with this and try to do their jobs better with it, who know more. But I think one of the things that is really important to understand is that what I think we want more data to be able to monitor, but even more than that, to be able to improve. And what is really, really important here is learning. And so I think the thing I would say that is most important is that we make sure that as we figure out the answers to the questions of what data are we going to try to collect, we don't put accountability ahead of learning. We don't over-invest in the nature of the measure, but instead understand that what we're trying to do is take snapshots and get kind of quick views that support learning and improvement, not that we're going to make anyone feel like you're going to be punished. I mean, think about a kindergarten entry measure. School districts have no control over where some kids are going to come in. They have moderate control over others. Zero purpose of accountability at that point. And we have accountability. It comes in third grade. And given the variation of students who walk in the door at preschool, TK, kinder, the enormity of the differentiation task that a high-quality early childhood teacher has to provide to support all students, the importance of really centering this idea of data for learning, data for knowledge, for diagnosis, over accountability is, I think, the most critical thing to consider in deciding kind of specifically the specific answers to that question.
I agree. No, I'm just kidding. We have experienced enough in our systems that when the word accountability comes into play, it can overimpose and create experiences that don't necessarily allow us an opportunity to focus on student learning. What do we know that they can do, and why does that matter? And what students are learning more, and what students are not, right? And what does that mean about what we do? A lot of our work with the California Ed partners in our coherence work was just about that, using that data to support us. We used the DRDP as a way of supporting us in, not only do they represent standards of a continuum of developmentally appropriate practice, but we also used it as a formative assessment where we were looking at data over time, anecdotal data over time about how students were doing. And because of that work, we abandoned our old, we used to call it the KRA, which is the Kinder Readiness Assessment, which is anyway, we got rid of it because we should be readying ourselves for our students, not them readying themselves for us. But we completely got rid of it and recreated a system where students came in and we used the DRDP, and we didn't roster them into classes. We just observed them. We had our psychologists. We had a whole bunch of folks just looking and taking anecdotal data about what students were, what they know and what they were able to do. And then we used that to really make informed decisions about the best placement for them. And it was a lot for educators, but at the end they were like, this was great and we wouldn't want to do it any other way. So I think the piece that's also important is if we create or have an opportunity to collect how students are learning. I don't want to say assessment because there's a mental model about what assessments are, but if we can track learning that gives us data that we can use for improvement, I think that's going to be the most important step to supporting that data gap.
I think everything that was just said is probably the core of any system we put in place. For me, the hard part about this question is one of the things we did as we moved to expand TK is we surveyed our kindergarten and our first grade teachers and said, what do you wish your students would come in learning so that they would be more successful in your grade? And none of those are metrics that are really easy to enter on a computer somewhere, right? To collect that data at a big level. The data we're looking at is things like DRDP, things like when I say, tell me about what you did yesterday. If they remember yesterday, that actually should be noted. Did they draw? Did they write? All of those are actually our best forms of learning where students are and where they're coming in, or looking at accounting collection. But how you then, this is for people like Alix, how you then take data like that and enter that in a meaningful way that's not really cumbersome, I'm not sure. But I think that's the kind of data I'd love to see us collecting that would both inform instruction, it would inform a system, and it would also help us better respond to the students in front of us.
And I want to go ahead and build on where you just left off, Stephanie. So we've noted that there are a lot of barriers that schools and districts face when collecting this type of student data, but it's something that you all in your districts have begun doing already. I would love to understand kind of what are the supports that you found are needed in your districts in order to support this type of data collection and analysis.
So this year we just moved to DRDP in our TKs. And I think the big things that we're finding are professional development. A lot of the big things we find in education, professional development, time. We also have a relatively collaborative relationship with our union. And so our TK teachers said, yes, we want to do DRDP, so it didn't become a working conditions issue. But I think we have to acknowledge that a lot of the things happening in TK can very quickly become a working conditions issue with our CBAs. And so I don't think we can understate the importance of some of those pieces in implementing them. But the time and ongoing time and ongoing professional development to do something like the DRDP, I think are probably foundational to trying to do that well.
I was just talking at the table over here. So we've been engaging in creating early learning, deeper early learning programs for almost a decade now. And as I'm listening to your journey and how more advanced you are now that you're further along the road than we were when we first started out, there's been networks, there's been opportunities to learn from each other that we didn't have when we started kind of this work, spearheading it. And in these networks, when the UPK came along and people literally were like crying, like, I don't have the facilities. And I was like, you're gonna be fine, everything's fine, But I think a key piece is bringing folks together that are doing this work. And the networking opportunities are just so important to help us get deeper in this space. Community of practice are incredibly powerful to support emerging practices and ongoing improvement. I would say, there's a lot of science around and research around coherence, right? So when you think about what supports need to help make change happen, and I talked a little bit about that idea of cogwheel or how things move together. If you're wanting to shape or reshape an assessment or assessment system to really, understand what students are learning, you also have to think about what are the professional learning experiences that the adults need to have, the leaders, the teachers. You also need to think about your families and what support they might need. You need to think about the curriculum. You need to think about what is the general, I know the felt accountability around implementing some of these pieces. And so when we think about supports that are needed, it's not just narrowing down, we need this data, but also what are the supports for all of those other pieces to ensure that when you put something like that in place, it's sustainable over time.
So I want to broaden the scope of the coherence conversation a bit more. You all in your districts and the districts that you've researched have seen folks go on this PK-TK journey implementing the work. And I'm curious, what aspects of PK and TK have you found need to be tightly linked in order for coherence to occur with the existing K-12 space? And what information are you looking at a district level, at a school level, to see if that type of coherence is actually occurring?
So those are a few questions. But the one thing I would say that we really look at is what's actually happening in the classroom. So we engage in regular walks into our early learning classrooms to see practices at play. And it's not just the adults and the principals, but we also have the adults are principals, sorry. But we also have teachers going into each other's classrooms. I would say that an important piece to keep in mind is common practices that we believe are most important and developmentally appropriate for our students, and being really clear about those and supporting those across grade levels. Those are, I would say, the key pieces that have supported us and really helping garner support around coherence. And I also think I shared a little bit about it, but we're so used to this idea of standards being pushed down on everybody. This is what they need to be career college ready, and so that means this for you and you and you and you and you. But the reality is we should be meeting students where they're at, right? So as they come in to preschool, or coming into TK from preschool or kinder, how are we having conversations with the teachers around practices and what students are capable of doing, and onward and upward? Those vertical conversations are so important.
I think we've thought about a lot around instructional practice. So how are we taking those practices and letting kids focus on the content as opposed to the structure as much as possible? That's been a big focus. The other work that we are doing in conjunction is a lot of work around professional learning teams and identifying our guaranteed standards. So the handful of things when students leave kindergarten, they will, we're making this promise to our families. But with this comes this idea of learning ladders or learning progressions like you were talking about earlier. And I think that the deeper we've gotten into that work around these learning progressions, the more coherence we're creating around these, these boulders of things that we're saying, these are core to students really doing the learning that we need them to do. Here's how we get there. So then what are the practices that we know are research-based that support that? I feel like we don't have the data yet, to be totally honest. That continues to, we've been so busy building a system. This is the first year I feel like we're starting to we have this DRDP data. I was telling Cresta, I can't link it to any of my other systems. So that's one of the things I'm trying to figure out, is how not to have to pull from all these different systems to do deep data analysis. The last piece that we've really struggled with some of our parent community in this alignment is understanding what we are promising to you as a district for TK. we're not asking kids to read and write when they get out of TK. And so I think that has also been a piece of coherence that's really important for our families to understand how it builds to kindergarten, but it's not a replacement for kindergarten.
I'll add a couple of things from just districts more broadly that we're studying. I think one of the things that's really hard is the cultural differences between early childhood historically and the K-12 system. And I think you even see it in the standards that you were talking about. When you hit kindergarten and you have Common Core state standards, there is an assumed learning progression that all kids ought to be on. And when you're talking with really high quality preschool teachers, they talk to you about where individual students are. And that's actually a really big difference, is thinking about maximizing the growth of all of the little people in your room versus getting all kids to the right place in the assembly line. I think a second thing connected to that kind of student-centered aspect, is really thinking about what developmentally appropriate is. And when you talk to really strong early childhood teachers, they understand what it means to be play-based, and that play-based doesn't mean not learning. It means designing activities through which students learn in a way that is right for those kids as 3-year-olds. And our K-12 schools haven't always done a good job of that, even in kinder. We've moved away from play. We have these ideas in sociology, it's called real school. And we have pushed real school, which means sitting in desks, doing worksheets, increasingly lower age-wise down into our K-12 system. And there's this real question in TK, as people are waiting for guidance from the state, what does it mean to be the first year of a 2-year kindergarten experience? And does that mean trying to get the 4-year-olds to do real school? And if you dig deeper, you know that CDE does not think that you should try to get the 4-year-olds to do real school. But in the meantime, there's a lot of work to do in school districts with their PK-TK coherence to figure out what is a trajectory where we start very play-based, assuming a high-quality experience for 3-year-olds, and suddenly transition to, at some point in time, we do have something that looks a bit more like school, though if it were really high quality, it would potentially look different than what some of our middle school and secondary schools look like. I think the last thing I will say is there are some real structural issues, and some of them were hinted up above, that make this hard. So curricula can't typically be adopted TK through 8. So there's some work to be done there. There are building questions. How do you build a community among your teachers that goes P3? How do you make sure those conversations happen? How do you prepare administrators to support some type of trajectory that is developmentally appropriate and builds on skills? So I think there are a whole lot of issues that kind of lie under the hood and require a ton of work to get to P3 coherence.
This is how I know Alix and I work together too much, because she's already started answering the question I'm about to ask to wrap us up. So beyond data to support coherence, are there other state-level resources or supports that you believe would support early grade coherence or would be helpful in that endeavor?
I think we were talking over here, but the updated preschool learning foundations will do a lot to help us see what that could look like. And then I do think the assessment systems we talked about, the saying we assess what we care about, or we know what we care about by what we assess. And it doesn't have to be assessment in this negative light. It's really around like, how do we know what our kids are learning? And so I think those two, and then the last, and I know I've spoken to this a lot, but I think professional development, having more aligned professional development is really key. One of the conversations we've started having is, how do we actually take some of these practices around play, guided play, and push them into kindergarten? And then where is the place for those in first grade? But that flips some of what we've been doing in our system for a long time. And so I don't want to say permission, but a little bit of like broader permission to do some of that is, I think, going to be really key to supporting this work for the sake of our kids.
The only thing I would add is sometimes when change happens, there's sort of unsaid structures or policies or practices that actually work against the work you're trying to do. And so I think we're talking about the importance of preschool through third grade coherence, and it was mentioned, right, that we know what happens when students are not coming in prepared in third grade, and the impact that that can have for them in their trajectory. 1 to 2 years behind puts them on a trajectory, even in the most accelerated school districts, of not being able to meet standards by the time they're in 12th grade. And I'm not sure that that message is as widely known and understood across the system, right? There's a lot of focus on A through G, and that is important, and I don't, I'm in a unified school district, and I have that opportunity to like celebrate all of the aspects of the system. And, I think when we know the impact of what happens when we don't have really solid, high quality early learning experiences and they're coming in third grade, the work we do in secondary could actually be a moot point, right? And so I think there might be a way to potentially continue to scream from the rooftops the importance of the work we're doing. And I know that, there is focus, and we know that it's there, but just the understanding and the why behind it, I think more widely spread would be incredibly important.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and join me in thanking our panelists for a great discussion. Thank you all. If you want to head back to the main room, we're going to have an awesome debate of local versus state control by San Jose High School debate team. So join us in there. It's about 15 minutes till then.